All right, welcome to the Fortify Your Data podcast. I'm here with Donnie Lambert. Now, is that Lampert or Lambert?
Lambert.
Lambert. I was right the first time. I actually know Donnie very well. We've been doing jiu-jitsu with each other for probably 3 years.
A little more than 3 years.
A little more than 3 years. He's always been in tech. And that's another phenomenon of jiu-jitsu guys in tech. So he also knows Dan Sosek, previous guest of Fortify Your Data. There's a lot of interesting things going on in his world. He's been a network admin. You've been a sysadmin, I think. Then you've even been doing a little bit of development.
Software development.
A little bit of software development. So just kind of run us through, your technical career history, and then kind of lead us into where you're going next.
Yeah. Okay. So it was. It was probably about. It's been 7 years ago now, almost, that I started working as a network field technician for a small company in the Pittsburgh area called ITG Networks. That they did installs, planning, support for Wi-Fi networks for the hospitality sector. So that means hotels mainly, but some restaurants, other spaces, business spaces. If you go to a hotel and you connect to their network, you have to accept the terms and conditions. That's a network requirement. That's a brand requirement for almost every hotel brand, and it keeps them safe legally, and they need people to take care of that because it's pretty hard to do on your own. So there's lots of companies out there that do that. Mine focus mainly in the greater Pittsburgh area and the Northeast United States, but we, when I was there, we had customers all over the place. So I started out as a network technician there. I started as a field technician, moved myself up to network technician. I was managing installations, designing some of the networks, things like that. I was working very, very constantly with technicians in different states, troubleshooting things remotely. It was a lot of stress, but it was a lot of fun too.
Sure, and then that led right into moving to Cleveland, right?
So after almost 3 years there, I had a friend in Cleveland reach out to me. I did some programming in high school. I was actually pretty good at it. That's what I originally went to school for. And he said, "Hey, we have an IT job at my company that could use a little programming skill. Are you interested?" And I said, "Absolutely. Tell me a little bit more about it." So I talked to him. I talked to the recruiter at Overdrive, which is the job I just left, and it seemed like an exciting opportunity to work for a really cool tech company. I got the interview, and the rest was history. I moved to Cleveland, and that was almost 4 years ago, and I loved it.
Yeah. So, and at that company, you changed roles a couple times. You leveled up, but you also had a big shift because for a while you were more on the network, right? And then you moved over to more design.
So actually, it was a huge shift from what I was doing at ITG to what I started doing at Overdrive, and then there was another shift from what I started at Overdrive to what I finished doing at Overdrive. So I started as a systems administrator at Overdrive, and I went from dealing mostly with Wi-Fi networks, like I was at my previous job, to now all the internal monitoring for servers and applications. So that's where I started to pick up some scripting skill, some coding skill. I learned how to code in C#, which wasn't that different from C++. I had a pretty solid C++ background from high school, so learning some new tricks, some new new ways of doing things that I didn't know were around, or had popped up in the 10 years since I took those programming classes in high school. That was a really cool experience. So I got to learn a little bit about that, and then so I was a monitoring admin for little over maybe 2.5 years at Overdrive before I took on the role of systems engineer.
Yeah, and Overdrive, for those of you that don't know, is a pretty big company, at least in the Cleveland area, and they were bought by Rakuten, but they make most ebooks, or I guess what is their relationship with the ebook market?
Okay, so Overdrive is a very large seller, distributor of ebooks, and their primary market is the library space, but they're also doing really well in schools as well. Overdrive is a little unique in compared to other ebook sellers in that they have very little of their market in retail. Most of their library books they get from the publishers and they sell to libraries, and then they have the websites and the apps that the patrons of those libraries can use to access the library books that the libraries own. So it's a little bit different of a paradigm than your typical retailer, but it's really interesting.
And so when you have a conversation with one of the recruiters at Overdrive, they might be like, we are ebooks, right? But I mean, for in a large way, I feel like you guys definitely have a big portion of that market.
It's Overdrive. I think it's in something like 93-95% of libraries in the United States, and then they have several customers worldwide. Tons of customers worldwide.
So they're really pushing SLED school stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you originally were moving, obviously Pittsburgh to Cleveland isn't the farthest move in the world, but it's still a pretty big move. It's definitely a lifestyle change.
Mm-hmm.
What was the thing that really attracted you to Overdrive versus what you were doing?
There were two things that really stuck out to me at Overdrive. One was the culture. I mean, if you go to Overdrive and you see the facility there, it's a really cool building. They have a warehouse that houses all their ebooks. If you don't know what I mean by that, ebooks sit on hard drives. So the warehouse is empty and it's used as a CrossFit gym. There's a basketball court. Overdrive has a 1-par golf hole with a walking track around it. It's a really neat place. It's a really it's an environment where everybody is working really hard, but if you need to get up and take a break and cool off, clear your head, you're more than welcome to do that. And then the bigger thing that attracted me to Overdrive was the opportunity there. Overdrive definitely is working with some cutting edge technology. They're doing a lot of stuff in the cloud. They're still doing a lot of stuff on-prem too, but they're working with really cool technologies like Elasticsearch and Kafka. And it was an opportunity for me to get hands-on with a lot of that stuff and learn about it and sort of hone my craft.
Sure. No, that's eloquently put. And so now that we've really given Overdrive a good pitch on culture and how interesting it is and the technology behind it, tell us why you're leaving Overdrive.
Well, it wasn't my intention to leave Overdrive, but a few months ago, I received an email in my inbox, and typically when I hear from a job recruiter, I'm not interested because I really loved what I was doing at Overdrive, but this one was from a small online startup out of Seattle, Washington called Amazon. So you might have heard of them.
Yeah, they do ebooks. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah, small ebook shop.
Yeah.
So, this podcast is also in some ways for me a going away party for Donnie, because Donnie was a big part of my life for a while, and now he has been stolen from me by the West Coast. Like many developer friends and technology friends I've had before him, but that's not the end of the world, and it's a phenomenal place to work, and it's a phenomenal opportunity. But when you look at, obviously you weren't looking for a career move. How did they entice you to move away from Overdrive? Because you did love working at Overdrive.
Yeah, I mean, I told this to to my managers and higher ups at Overdrive. I said, there's very few places I would even consider leaving Overdrive for, and number one is, it's going to be hard to find, a culture like Overdrive's again. And I can't say that Amazon's will be like Overdrive, but I feel like it's a culture that I'll fit in at. And I think the biggest thing is I'm always trying to improve myself and, take the next step, and going to Amazon will give me the ability to really challenge myself at a new level, and I think there's not very many companies that do things at the scale that Amazon does, so that's really exciting to me.
Yeah, and do you have an idea of what you're doing at Amazon yet?
Yeah, so I don't know how much I can disclose, legally, whatever. Yeah. But I'll be working as a systems engineer on one of their internal applications that every employee that Amazon uses. So I'll be kind of working on the back end systems with automation and testing things, and probably some proof of concept things. It'll be very exciting work.
Yeah, and so work-related, or maybe Seattle-related, what are you most excited for in that transition?
Work-related, I'm excited to. I'm definitely excited to jump into a company at Amazon and see how they do things on a day-to-day basis, at the scale that they do it at, compared to how we did things at Overdrive. I'm looking. I just want to see the side-by-side comparison, I guess. And then the move to Seattle, I think it's a little bit scary, moving all the way across the country, but I think sometimes you have to do something that scares you a little bit.
Yeah, get out of your comfort zone.
Yeah, I need to break out of my comfort zone a lot, and I noticed the more I do that, the happier I am. So it'll be really neat to kind of experience the culture they have in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah. So before I put a nice bow tie on your technical history up until now, maybe a little into the future, what was the initial thing that got you into IT in the first place?
I've always been like tinkering with computers. I remember just from being a kid, our first computer, second computer, I did a doozy and reformatted the hard drive. My mom was pissed, so I had to get it operational again. And I don't know. I've always played with computers. Always, tinkered around. I don't know if you remember what it was like trying to get some games to work back in the day on hardware that wasn't fully operational, but sometimes it was kind of like the it was interesting times. It's not like today where
everything plugs in and works the first time.
Yeah, you just download a game from Steam today. It's like sometimes you brought home a game from EB Games that you paid and you brought home in a box with cellophane wrap, and you open it up and you put the CD in your computer and your graphics card won't work, and
Yeah.
it's pretty hard to convince mom to buy a new graphics card, especially when
She just bought the game.
she just bought the game, and also I'm like a 10, 11-year-old kid, don't even know how to install the graphics card. That was until I built my first PC back in as a senior in high school.
And then you were overclocking your own CPU.
Yeah, I was doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I remember that. And this might be a tangent that dies real quick, but do you remember like just what the internet was like, especially like the early 2000s versus like what it is now? Like I think about that a lot, and it's lost on a lot of people, even people that were.
It's hard to remember sometimes, but I do remember we had a dial-up connection in my household until after I went away to college for my first semester. So it was a lot different. You had a lot of waiting for pages to load, and
well, even like I remember GeoCities was a real thing, and I think that now like GeoCities is a joke. Like you mention it, and everyone just kind of chuckles when they think about like GeoCities, and like I remember like how much like GIFs were such a profound advancement in technology, where it's like, oh, this picture moves.
Yeah,
clearly we are living in the future. Right, and there's just like people that were obviously around, like older people that clearly were on the internet in the 90s and the early 2000s. They just were like, yeah, no, the internet's has always been this way. I'm like, I don't know, because I even remember like old eBay. Old eBay was way different than new eBay.
Yeah,
right. It's just like, it's crazy how much certain things changed. I'm surprised by what stayed the same. MySpace going away is another thing that's I guess. When MySpace was a thing, I don't think anyone ever thought that it could go away.
Yeah, I remember when Facebook was the Facebook, and and you had to have a college email address to have an account. And when I got my first Facebook account, not every college was supported yet, and I don't even remember when they opened it up to the general public. But it was a completely different. Platform back then.
The first things you were doing were doodling with your mouse on other people's walls. Remember? Mm-hmm. You were just doing like that, and it was just like wall pictures that were just scribbles and pokes for a minute. That was like the 2006, 2007 Facebook that I remember. I was not it when it was just a college only thing, 'cause I'm not a schooler, but
before that, you could go in there. You would go in there and you would put your college classes in, and you'd see like who's in your class with the professor. Like I think you could even like rate professors or something back. There was some interesting features that have
long since.
Yeah.
It's just and even like I was on YouTube the year it launched, and the content that was originally on YouTube, what YouTube was for, it was mostly like picture slide reels. Mm-hmm. Like it's interesting to me, because like a lot of people weren't. I guess a lot of those sites were really not mainstream until they were mainstream, is the best way to put it. And a lot of people really ignore like their humble beginnings of like YouTube being all these like anime music videos and just strange things.
Yeah, I think there was a period of time where on YouTube you couldn't upload a video that was longer than 10 minutes, and the video quality was always 240p. Like it was not very refined back in the day.
I remember being very young and watching anime, and and it was all subbed, and it was usually just barely clear enough that you could make out the subtitles, because the subtitles were always scrambled by the poor video quality. So yeah, it's just but that video, like the concept of video being accessible, because YouTube was really the first taste of that I got, versus like a moving picture or just a picture. I was like, well, this is kind of where things are going to go. Mm-hmm. But I would never believe that YouTube would eventually be what it is today. Incredibly disruptive to TV, So, but yeah, it's interesting, because a lot of like on the like I guess on the business professional side, there's still a lot of people that didn't like grow up on the internet, in the same way. So they're like, yeah, I used Facebook when everyone else was on Facebook. Like their entry to Facebook was like 2012.
Yeah.
Not the Facebook.
In 2005.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, and YouTube was 05, 04, so. Yeah, and then, like, forums were such a big thing, too. Like, I just wanted to reminisce on that for a minute, too. Like, what happened to all my forums? Those are gone. Like, now there's just, like, Discord and Slack, and, it's just, the world's a very different place, and it happened very quickly. Maybe this is what getting old's like. But,
yeah, the change in the internet has happened really quickly. I remember there was a point in my life where, when I was a kid and we first had the internet, Yahoo used to be real big at indexing things, and you could click on like categories and get to websites, and there's games, news, all that stuff. There was a time when I was a kid that I thought you could get to every website on the internet through clicking through things on Yahoo.
Yeah, there's that. They later made that kind of like the Wikipedia game, right? Similar thing.
Yeah.
Similar concept. Yeah. Oh, miss you, old internet. You're not the same. But anyways, the one other main kind of subject sphere I wanted to bring up with you is jiu-jitsu. Okay. It has nothing to do with technology at all, except for we are in a gym that has, let's say, 100 regular students. I would guess that 40 of them, that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but close to half the people I've interacted with for sure are in some flavor of IT, which is bizarre to me. And as I go around and I see like people at tournaments or I compete, I'll frequently wear IT-related T-shirts, or I'll have something that indicates that I am also in IT, or I'm running around with this book trying to get people to read it. But but it's a weird phenomenon that there's just so many jiu-jitsu people in IT, and I believe we were kind of talking about last night. Amazon might have a jiu-jitsu team, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
And I think Google certainly does.
I'm pretty sure Google does, yeah.
Yeah, so it's ingrained in technology, and more so than any other martial art that I am aware of. I kickboxed for a number of years as well, and I can tell you that nobody did IT that kickboxed when I was kickboxing. There wasn't a single guy I met. And in jiu-jitsu, every other guy seems to be programming in Python. Really strange. So, enlighten me. What is your take on this, and I'll give you my hot take on it.
Yeah, you know what? That's a tough one. I really don't know. But one thing that I think you should consider is jiu-jitsu. While it's a tough sport, it's also very accessible to just about anyone. Any age, any gender, any disability, anything. You can take jiu-jitsu classes and you get something out of it. It's really, it's just really open to anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people get into jiu-jitsu for a lot of reasons too. At this point, I'm mostly in for fitness, but I compete still a little bit. It's a great way to get in shape, but then I also hear the argument, I'll do jiu-jitsu once I get in shape so I don't get my ass beat. But you can lose weight by just doing jiu-jitsu, and you get better at jiu-jitsu by just doing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. So, the best way to get in jiu-jitsu shape is start doing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's the nature of the beast. So, how did you get into jiu-jitsu?
So that was interesting. I didn't really know what it was. Like, I'd watched like the UFC, and I'd seen many of the common jiu-jitsu techniques and submissions, like rear naked choke, armbar, things like that. I didn't really know that those were
jiu-jitsu specific.
Yeah, I didn't know those were aspects of jiu-jitsu. So this was back when I was in Pennsylvania still, and I just finished a really long day at the at a job on the other side of Pittsburgh, and I stopped for a drink on the way home, and I ran into my buddy, and he started telling me about how he started doing jiu-jitsu, and I was like, what's that like? Tell me about it.
Yeah.
And the more he was describing it, the more I started to make the connections. And also I was like, this sounds really similar to wrestling. He's like, oh yeah, it's a lot like wrestling. And
you wrestled, right?
Yeah, so wrestling was really, that was my sport from 7th grade all the way to the end of high school. I was really active in wrestling. I would go to camps in the summer. I would go to tournaments in the summer. You know, I was a year-round wrestler. And after high school, college, you know, there's not a lot of opportunity to continue in the sport of wrestling, even on a, you know, casual level. So it's this seemed to me like an opportunity to get something, you know, get the same thing I was getting out of wrestling again after being absent from that sport for 8 years. So I went to a class a couple weeks later. I got vertigo the next day.
Okay.
So I didn't go to class for another 2 weeks after that.
Yeah.
You know, they thought, oh, this is, you know, just one of those wrestlers that shows up once and never see again.
Yeah.
But no, I stuck around, and then was at that gym for a year, and then fortunately, when I made the move to Cleveland, there was a wonderful gym just at the bottom of the hill from where I worked. Yeah, Overdrive. So
same street. Yeah, small world. So my take on it is, one, you don't have to have very strong physical attributes, and not that anyone can box too. Or do karate or whatever, you know. But I think that jiu-jitsu is a lot more amicable to people that maybe aren't necessarily in the best of shape, and it's kind of like a gateway into being in shape.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture in and of itself is more of like, let's get better at the technical aspects of this sport, versus like MMA is very aggressive. It's very stay on top. It's, you know, I don't need to be the best at everything. I just need to be the best at my game. And certainly there are people in jiu-jitsu that follow that philosophy as well.
Yeah.
Most of the people at our gym, which is a pretty competitive gym, aren't competing, aren't like competitors. They'll compete at a local tournament here and there, but they're not really trying to fight the best of the best.
They're not trying to go win pans or something.
They're just doing jiu-jitsu for the sake of doing jiu-jitsu. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's the same for a lot of the other like combat competitive sports. And you know, I think there's a lot of crossover between other like notable IT guys that do jiu-jitsu or notable leaders, and it's almost looked at with like this jiu-jitsu is an intellectual sport, and that kind of feeds into it. And you know, I think having practiced multiple martial arts, I think that this is true for many of them, but more so than the other ones. Jiu-jitsu is very much a big if-then statement, right? Which is what a lot of programming also comes down to.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way to put it.
Right, so it's like, all right, I'm going to grab his arm and try to break it. If he blocks this, then I'll do this. If he goes this way, I'll pivot. I'm going to try to take him down. If he blocks me here, I'm going to do this. And it's just this flow chart of what goes on in your head that you program into your muscle memory. And that is troubleshooting. You know, okay, the Wi-Fi's down. You know, well, if it's, you know, I'm going to check the DNS server. I'm going to check this. I'm going to redo this. If this doesn't work, I'll do this. And that seems to be the best theory I can come up with zero research. This is all anecdotal evidence. I'm not even that smart. This is what I've come up with. But it is a weird phenomenon. I know an IT auditor at my gym that does like HIPAA compliancy. I know several software developers. I know several system admins. I know some guys that are doing stuff in biotech labs. But it takes all. It's a really beautiful thing. But I definitely wanted to kind of get your take on it. You know, Dan Sosek of Rec Prep also was at our gym. That's actually how I met him and got involved with him. And I mean, I guarantee you there's going to be other people that I train jiu-jitsu with that are also going to end up on this podcast at some point, because they are, you know, if they're not tech leaders now, I think that they will be. And I think that Donnie is definitely kind of on that path too. So this will be a interesting piece of history of like Donnie, the tech CEO extraordinaire, 10 years before his ascent into stardom, right? And I will have, I think, the first podcast interview, right?
I've never been on a podcast before.
Boom, this is history. So when Donnie ascends, this piece of content is going to be worth millions, and I will give Donnie half. like seriously, the interesting thing of being able to see somebody perform in jiu-jitsu, and then obviously I never worked with Donnie, but I've interacted with him at work. I've had like work lunches with him. I've met some of his colleagues. Seeing somebody that is extremely successful and able to adapt in two different situations is definitely, for me, an indicator that you're on to great things, and not just trying to blow smoke up your rear end. At jiu-jitsu, he has a very distinct style. He has a wrestler's base. He has a really good top game. He's not afraid to put himself in positions that he's not necessarily that great at, because that's how you get better. You practice the tougher things. He went from being a Wi-Fi guy to like a sysadmin guy to then going into programming. I mean, those are similar, but they're also very profoundly different, and there's a lot of nuance to them. And there's a lot of people that wouldn't be willing to switch. In fact, I know many engineers that I work with at Blue Bridge, or that I've worked with through Cisco or anywhere else, that they pick a path and they never veer from it. There's a I don't even think it's like a fear, it's just, or a level of comfort they don't want to leave. I think that's just what they do, and they're not interested in trying the other things, and that's very much not Donnie. And I think that if you look at just the whole catalog of moving from Pittsburgh to Cleveland, and now Pittsburgh to Seattle, moving from growing with each of the companies that he's in, the impact that he has on his teammates, I think that you can kind of tell that Donnie's definitely on the path to great things. And I do genuinely, like, this is just, yeah, I genuinely mean that. Like, that's I'm super impressed with all the career paths he's taken, all the chances he's taken, all the chances he's taken just in his personal life in jiu-jitsu. It's gonna be rough not having you around at the gym, but we will make do. You'll find some other gym at Amazon. You'll be on Amazon's competition team. You'll all of a sudden come back ripped, in a different weight class, just beating people up. And when you come back, I hope you beat us all up at the gym.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to plug, or any closing statements?
It's been a pleasure to be on this podcast. It's been a pleasure to be your good friend these past 3.5 years. It's kind of surreal just moving the life again. But I just want to say thank you for having me on, and this was a lot of fun. Yeah, for sure. If you guys want to heckle Donnie on LinkedIn, I'll for sure put his LinkedIn website page on website page. No one says that. His LinkedIn page on on the YouTube and on the RSS feed for the podcast. So back in the early days of the internet, they might have said that.
Well, I remember having a MySpace page and calling it my website, which I feel like now is a faux pas. But if it's a page that I wrote the design for, and I forced you to listen to whatever song I chose when that page loaded, that's my website.
You added some custom HTML and CSS to that. That was your website.
I was a web designer by trade. Yeah, I made $0. So it was a bad business. I got out of it. R.I.P. MySpace. That's why MySpace failed. I was out.
Yeah.
So I went on to the Facebooks. So, well, thank you, everybody. That was the podcast. Again, slightly more personal than the other ones, but I think that it's still good content. Nevertheless, if you have a chance, or you haven't had a chance yet, go to YouTube and subscribe to that. I don't think I've ever pitched that. I feel weird pitching it, but I'm just going to make a point to tell you guys to do that, because everyone else seems to do that. That's the thing that people do. Check us out, fortifyyourdata.com. Check out the book. It's a great book. It's still relevant. Blockchain, IoT, AI, and how it pertains to cybersecurity. Your guide to the emerging technologies. Thank you, guys. See you next week.